Hello, this is part two of my discussion regarding cognitive errors, behavioral biases. The whole point here is that your system one brain or your fast thinking brain does these things automatically without your conscious or system two, your analytical thinking brain, being aware of it. And these biases definitely cause you to have errors in your forecasting ability in a negative sense. You can see part one if you follow that link there. So we have this thing that's called the observer expectancy effect. And the idea here is that as an observer, you're so subconsciously kind of influencing other people. Okay, so if you think about your relationship, say you're a PM and you have an analyst, there's a very good chance that you are subconsciously kind of giving your opinion about, say, a stock to the analyst. As an analyst, you might be being influenced by your superior, given these like kind of subconscious little clues that they give you. You know, be aware of this. Try to look at just the data and take that on a case-by-case basis. There's something called the illusion of validity, and this is especially true when there's some patterns there. So the idea here is you're given this kind of illusion of skill. They did a study where there were 25 wealth managers, wealth advisors, and they all felt like they were skillful, and their supervisors also felt like they were skillful. But when they actually looked at the performance of these 25 wealth managers over an 8-year period of time, they didn't see anything different than you would get from kind of a simple coin toss, right? So the idea here is that we overestimate our ability to interpret the data and use that data to predict the future. This is true when we see consistency. So if we see kind of a student with all B's, we will predict that, the student's, future grades based on that consistent pattern there. There's something else called the clustering illusion. Now here, the idea here is that we see patterns where there aren't patterns, okay? That we ignore or we don't realize that there's true variability or true randomness in something and find some pattern that just isn't there. There's no causal effect for that. So if you think about stocks, huge thing here is if you just look at, stock price patterns, technical charts, we believe that we see patterns there that will then repeat when in fact it can be described as nothing more than noise. Be aware of that. There's something called the pessimism bias. And here, this is where you overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes. So you can think about that in terms of the market. Maybe you're afraid to get into the market because you're, if I get in now, it's just going to go down. I'll wait more. You're second guessing yourself. You never actually get in there. When that entry point is almost irrelevant when you think about a true long-term investor. You can think about that with stocks. Oh man, this stock's been running forever. If I buy now, I'm gonna be the one that buys right at the peak, and just thinking about these negative things. So really, again, do the analysis and see what makes sense for you. There's something called selection bias, and this is something pretty neat and something that you've definitely experienced many times in your life. I remember when I was a kid and someone introduced me to the game of Slug Bug, I started noticing VW beetles everywhere. I'm like, man, everybody's trying to beetle. But that was really because it had been brought to my attention. So when something kind of enters your conscious mind, you start noticing it more. You can think about, say Tesla. It's always in the news. Maybe you hone in on one that's a positive story, one that's a negative story. Then all of a sudden, from then on, man, they're all positive or they're all negative. You just kind of get this thing where you're ignoring the full data set because you're kind of got this one particular thing in your mind. As with cars, and those cars have always been there. With Tesla, there's positive and negative news stories all the time. Can you want to look at the data? What is the data actually saying? What are the statistics? Probably notice that the number of beetles on the road were 7%, both before and after your observation. Finally, the idea here is I'm just introducing these biases. They are affecting you and your outcomes, your forecasting ability in a negative way. You really need to figure out a way to engage your system to brain. Being aware of these is not enough. You need some way to create some discipline in your process. At the end of this long series, we will discuss some of those options and some of those ways you might counteract this. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Hope you enjoyed that.